Welcome to the Decision Style Profile, or DSP, certification module. This module is part of the certification process that includes several steps. Take the DSP, complete this online module, read the facilitator guide, discuss with your coach, deliver your training or coaching, and finally, debrief with your coach. We recommend that these steps be completed in this order. By the end of this module, you will be able to explain the model, discuss the 5 factors, and interpret the individual and group reports. After you have a good understanding of DSP, your time with your coach will be much more productive. Plan to use this certification module and the facilitator guide as your preparation for a great conversation with your coach. The Decision Style Profile explores the decision-making preferences of individuals. It's a self-assessment instrument that measures a leader's capability to appropriately consider the level of inclusion needed to make a decision, as well as 5 factors determined critical to making quality decisions. Because how you decide often determines whether your decision gets implemented. Good decision-making affects bottom-line results. Leaders must make effective decisions in a dynamic environment under less than optimal conditions. They do this by being clear about the decision to be made, overcoming barriers to good decision-making, choosing the right process for each decision, and adapting their personal decision-making style to bring about the best outcome. Of course, leaders face many barriers to effective decision-making, such as personal and interpersonal barriers, analytical barriers, and failures in learning. In this module, we will discuss the DSP model, including the 5 decision-making styles and the 5 situation factors. Let's get started. The DSP model is based on a continuum of 5 levels of inclusion that range from decisions made in complete autocratic isolation to those using a team-oriented consensual approach. A decision maker may move up and down the continuum with ease, or may show a strong preference for a particular style. The next 5 slides provide details about each of the decision styles. The first and least inclusive style is directing. In this style, a decision maker makes the decision independent of others. Typically, this may be the person with the most control or authority over the situation. The decision is made quickly and without discussing the situation with anyone. When directing is used, a decision maker typically does the following: relies completely on his or her own judgment, assumes an understanding of the situation, assumes all necessary information has been obtained, does not share the situation with others, does not solicit information, and it consumes the least amount of time. Fact-finding. When fact-finding is used, a decision-maker knows who has the needed information, seeks the information, and then makes the decision alone. Key information is solicited from one or more people before the decision is made. The fact-finder may or may not describe the problem to them, but solicits information only, not solutions or suggestions. When a fact-finding style is used, the decision-maker typically does the following: identifies specific information needed to make a decision, knows from whom to request or obtain information, does not share the situation with others, does not solicit advice or suggestions, reserves the sole right to make the decision. Investigating. When investigating style is used, a decision-maker consults with other people and then decides alone. The investigator shares the situation with selected individuals. The investigator gathers information from them, seeks their ideas about possible solutions, but makes the final decision. When the investigating style is used, the decision-maker typically does the following: shares the situation with others, may solicit information, solicits input in the form of suggestions and possible courses of action, selectively includes key stakeholders whose input is most relevant to the decision, accepts input from others, but clearly reserves the right to make the final decision. Collaborating. When collaborating is used, a decision-maker consults with all key stakeholders and then decides alone. The collaborator meets with stakeholders in a group and discusses the situation and possible alternatives, essentially using them as consultants. The collaborator may use others' preferences, feelings, and opinions as additional input, but retains the final decision-making authority. When the collaborating style is used, the decision maker typically does the following: solicits input from all stakeholders who have an interest in the decision and its outcome, shares the situation with stakeholders, asks for ideas and input, discusses with all stakeholders simultaneously to avoid confusion about information and shared opinions, reserves the right to make the final decision while valuing the input of the key stakeholders. Finally, the most inclusive style is teaming. When teaming style is used, the decision maker turns to the stakeholders to make the decision. These may be members of a work team, task force, project team, or others whose input and buy-in are critical for successful implementation. The teaming decision style should be a consensus decision. Please note that research suggests that voting rather than consensus decisions within teams can in fact be damaging and lessen successful implementation. When a teaming style is used, the decision maker typically does the following: turns to stakeholders to join in making the decision, does not relinquish the accountability for the decision, reaches a consensus decision. Knowing which decision style is appropriate for a given situation is critical to arriving at the best decision. Choosing the appropriate decision style is a learned skill separate from deciding. Let's do a quick check to see how comfortable you feel with each of the 5 decision-making styles. Drag the correct style name to the brief description to check your understanding. When you are finished, click Next. Now that you have an understanding of the 5 decision-making styles, let's examine the 5 factors that affect good decision-making. Understanding the key factors that impact the decision-making process is critical to the success and results of a decision. The DSP model uses the 5 factors to help any leader determine when a better decision will likely result from involving others in the decision process. The 5 factors that impact the decision quality, acceptance, and implementation are problem clarity, information, commitment, alignment, and time. The first factor is problem clarity. Problem clarity focuses on whether or not the decision maker has an adequate understanding of the nature and scope of the situation under consideration. When the problem is well understood, a decision style with a lower level of inclusion can be considered. When the nature of the problem is not clear to the decision maker, a more inclusive style may be needed to gain clarity. If the issue is clear, too much inclusion may be a waste of energy, time, and resources. Lack of problem clarity can lead to weak analysis of the problem and can cause the decision maker to gather inappropriate information or to identify relevant stakeholders incorrectly. Lack of problem clarity can lead to considerable effort being spent on the wrong problem. Having good information is important to effective decision-making. When reliable information is readily available, a less inclusive decision style may be appropriate. If information is unknown or is unreliable, a more inclusive style can be considered. Given the decision maker has good problem clarity, after identifying the required information, the decision maker must determine where or with whom that information can be found. A good decision considers the level of commitment it will receive from those charged with implementing it. If the commitment needed is compliance or reluctant acquiescence, then less inclusive decision styles are appropriate. If the level of support needed requires the commitment of those charged with its implementation, then more inclusive decision styles are appropriate. One of the most effective ways to gain commitment for implementation of a decision is to include those persons charged with implementation in the decision-making process. Alignment is the degree to which the stakeholders and the organization are motivated by common or shared goals. When stakeholders exhibit low agreement on goals, decision styles that favor less inclusion should be considered. High alignment on goals invites a higher level of participation in decision-making. When goal agreement is questionable, using a highly inclusive style can be dangerous. It can cause significant conflict between stakeholders and the organization, or among various stakeholders. In those circumstances, the decision may be stalled due to internal arguing and disagreement. Time has 2 dimensions. One is the degree of urgency surrounding a decision, while the other is the investment of time and effort others must make to participate in the decision-making process. There are risks in taking too much time or in rushing a decision. Typically, if time is a critical factor and any delay will create more risk, a less inclusive decision style would be appropriate. If time is not critical, then a more inclusive decision style can be considered. In most cases, each decision should be made with the least investment of time possible, while carefully balancing all the other decision-making factors: problem clarity, information, commitment, and alignment. Applying the decision factors in isolation produces a right decision style. However, it is important to remember that several factors can affect an individual's decision style. Consequently, decision-makers should be aware of multiple issues that might push their decision style preferences toward a particular style. A challenge for decision-makers is to know when such issues are affecting them, to what degree they are being affected, and how much freedom they have to adjust their behavior. These issues include the following: personal preference, norms or standards as determined by an organization's culture, current circumstances and work environment, a boss, peers, and/or direct reports with unique needs and demands. Before moving on to the actual assessment and interpretation of results, let's check your understanding of the 5 factors. Drag the factor to the correct definition. When you have finished, click Next. The DSP explores the decision-making preferences of individuals. Participants read 10 case studies and place themselves in the role of the leader or manager or supervisor who is responsible for arriving at a decision. Take note, the participants do not decide on actions to take to resolve the 10 cases. Rather, they indicate which of 5 decision styles they believe is most appropriate for each case. Each of the 10 cases has a suggested decision style that takes into consideration the 5 critical decision factors. An individual's feedback reports the frequency that the decision-maker chose each decision style, their tendency toward too much or too little inclusion, and their consideration of the 5 decision factors across the 10 cases. The individual feedback report compares those results to the choices of over 20,000 managers and executives in the current DLI database. The next 4 screens show a sample individual report and explain the different aspects of the report. The decision style preference is the first section in My Feedback in the report, which includes a 1-paragraph description that is customized for each participant. The report also includes a table with respondent choices divided into the 5 decision style categories. Because the 10 cases in the decision style profile present 2 of each style according to the suggested solutions, one would expect to see a uniform distribution with a frequency of 2 reported for each decision style. Any departure from this uniform distribution may suggest a bias toward more autocratic decision-making styles, that is, directing and fact-finding, or toward more consensual decision-making styles, that is, teaming and collaborating. Any distribution other than uniform also indicates that key decision factors were disregarded in the respondent's choice of decision styles. Of course, a uniform distribution in this chart is no guarantee that the respondent chose the suggested style on the appropriate cases. It only indicates that the respondent was unbiased, even if incorrect. Subsequent analysis in the report will clarify and expand on the respondent's choices of decision styles. Next, let's look at the summary of responses to the 10 cases. A table shows the respondent's selected style and the suggested style for all 10 cases. This table also reports the distribution of decision styles selected by 20,000 managers in the Decision Style Profile database. From this table, respondents learn about the variation in opinion that exists among practicing managers and executives when choosing the most appropriate decision style for any set of circumstances. Respondents can see that the suggested style is selected in some cases by as little as 31% of respondents, and on others by as much as 70%. The appropriate interpretation of this table is that proper consideration of the 5 decision factors is critical to choosing the best possible decision style. The wide variation in style selection emphasizes the variety of ways and the extent to which practicing managers consider or disregard the 5 critical decision factors. Next, let's look at the Decision Inclusion Index. This index reports the bias respondents may have to be more inclusive or less inclusive in their selection of appropriate decision styles. The Decision Inclusion Index measures the extent to which respondents chose decision styles that favored more inclusion or less inclusion than is recommended across the 10 cases. The Decision Inclusion Index is calculated as the sum of the arithmetic value of incremental departures from the suggested style. Thus, for each case, the incremental difference between a respondent's style choice and the suggested decision style is measured. Respondent choices that are less inclusive than suggested are recorded as negative increments. Respondent choices that are more inclusive than recommended are recorded as positive increments. The Decision Inclusion Index is the sum of these positive and negative values for all 10 cases. The index score ranges from -20 to +20. An index of 0 indicates that a respondent chose the suggested style on all 10 cases, or was biased as often toward more inclusion as toward less inclusion. A score of -20 indicates that a respondent chose a style for all 10 cases that was, to the greatest extent possible, a departure from the suggested style in the direction of less inclusion. This could be interpreted as an extremely autocratic style of management. A score of +20 indicates that a respondent chose a style for all 10 cases that was to the greatest extent possible a departure from the suggested style in the direction of more inclusion. This could be interpreted as an extremely consensual style of management. Even though it is possible to fall in the extremely inclusive or autocratic ranges, most decision makers fall between the scores of -10 and +10 on the Decision Inclusion Index. In the Analysis of Decision Factors section, participants will find the custom text reports for the cases on which the respondent ignored each decision factor. The theory supporting decision style profile holds that selecting a style other than the suggested style results from a failure to properly consider one or more of the 5 key decision factors. The information reported in the participant report identifies the key decision factors that the respondent ignored or disregarded in selecting decision styles. Note that each factor has multiple opportunities to be ignored. The tables on these pages show the incremental percentage of the 20,000 managers in the Decision Style Profile database who ignored or disregarded each factor a certain number of times. After decision makers receive their individual feedback report, they have the option to create a decision-making game plan. This game plan helps the decision maker pull together themes that highlight if they over or underused specific styles, the factors they may have overlooked, and plans to increase their overall decision-making effectiveness. In addition to preparing individual feedback reports, facilitators may elect to create a report for all or any subset of the respondents in a group program. This allows the facilitator to assess the overall performance of all participants in a group, or to compare the performance of subgroups of participants. This capability is initially useful in providing feedback to the group by acquainting them with the average performance of the group as a whole. The next 4 screens go over the group report. Levels of inclusion for the group indicate case by case how many participants selected decision styles that used lower inclusion, higher inclusion, or as suggested. The Group Average Decision Inclusion Index reveals a single measure of group tendencies to be more inclusive or less inclusive than suggested for the given cases. An index score of -3 to +3 represents the middle range of the database, representing 65% of the managers. Those groups scoring much below -3 would be identified with the least inclusive managers. Facilitators can use the group average to give participants their first sense of how this score compared to the database. Obviously, some group members will be above and some below this group average. This is another piece of information the facilitator can use to spark discussion within the group about the organization's decision-making practices. In addition to the group average, the group report also provides a distribution of scores. This distribution shows the number of group members who fell at each inclusion index score. In this example, we can see that 5 group members have a score of +4 and 2 group members have a score of +5. Another way to view this distribution is that 19% of the group scores fell between +4 and +5. A summary of responses to the 10 cases is presented in the group report. For each case, The style the group chose most often and the suggested style are given. Also shown is the percentage of times each decision style was chosen by case. This figure can be compared to the normative percentiles from the Decision Style Profile database. The facilitator can use this feedback to identify the specific cases for which the group had the greatest disagreements with the suggested styles. Discussions of these cases can help identify those organizational practices and cultural assumptions that may be leading these managers to make less effective decisions. Analysis by decision factors is presented in the group report. For each of the 5 critical decision factors, the analysis identifies the number of participants who overlooked that factor across the decision cases. Not all decision factors play a role in each case. As you can see, for problem clarity, there are 5 cases that address this decision factor. This feedback can help the facilitator and participants identify which decision factors are most often overlooked or not considered when making decisions. Answer these 5 questions to check your understanding of the individual and group reports. When you are finished, click Next. Now that you have finished this module, you should be able to explain the model, discuss the 5 factors, and interpret both the individual and the group reports. You are ready to meet with your coach now.